One day, my mother-in-law and my wife came to visit me. They came up to me and said, "Go to the market. Let's have a feast." I took my bag and went shopping. 5 minutes later, my phone rang and my mother-in-law said, "Wait for me, or you'll buy the wrong thing." Here she is, running towards me, flushed. Just a young woman. My mother-in-law is in her 50s, and I'm sure she's attractive. My wife has told me all sorts of stories about her childhood with her. I cast an appraising glance over her, studying her from head to toe. Her legs, her lush form, she was literally bursting out of the neckline of her blouse. Her waist was still quite fresh, and I felt myself getting hot, but I didn't show it. It just surprised me to think of her that way. No matter how many times we'd met, I'd never had thoughts like that. But now it was like a switch had been flipped in my head. I wanted something to happen between us. She took me under her arm and led me to the market. She didn't trust me to pick out the vegetables, so she did it herself. She walked up to the counter, bent over, and I felt uncomfortable with her movements. There were a lot of people. We were in rush hour. I pretended I was accidentally pushed. It was very crowded. Anyway, I fell on top of her, and as I was falling, I got caught up in her. I accidentally grabbed her stomach and pulled her to me. She laughed, straightened up, even joked something on a racy subject, saying, "Be careful, or you'll get me pregnant," and laughed. From that point on, the situation escalated. More and more often, I snuggled up to her, pretending it was accidental. One day, I even managed to touch her from behind. I was surprised at how firm it was. My mother-in-law wasn't embarrassed, only joking that I needed to get away for 5 minutes. She asked me to keep an eye on the merchandise while she stepped away. I mentally decided to act boldly and take my mother-in-law by the horns, so to speak. The opportunity presented itself when the aunt selling clothes stepped aside. I pushed her against the wall, and she didn't resist, but just as things were heating up, her friend returned. It was a shame it was over so quickly. I was just starting to get involved, but there was nothing to do. We continued to wander around the market, but there were no more secluded moments. We picked up some groceries and grabbed a couple bottles of juice and then came home with heavy bags. My wife immediately ran to the kitchen to cook. My mother-in-law said, "If you don't mind, I'm going to lie down on the couch for half an hour. I'm getting dizzy." "Sure," my wife replied, and I sat down in the armchair to read a magazine. Suddenly she said, "Sit wherever you want." With those words, my wife ran to the kitchen. She loves to cook and doesn't like people hanging around and disturbing her, so she can sit there for hours. Now, Ida was lying on the couch, covered with a plaid. The chair wasn't far away, literally within reach, and I reached for it. But before I did, I laid down the magazines, threw the plaid over me, turned on the table lamp, and turned off the overhead light. The room became cozy. The atmosphere was pleasant. I slipped my hand under the plaid and began to explore. My heart was racing, my forehead was sweating, and my shirt was sticking to my body. I had to get up from the chair and go to the bathroom to wash my face and freshen up. My mother-in-law and I are just like teenagers. The excitement of what was happening was almost unbearable. The forbidden nature of our interactions added to the exciting tension that built up every time we were near each other. I couldn't help but wonder where this would lead, and if we would eventually be caught. The risk was exciting, but nerve-wracking at the same time. Even though I tried to remain calm, My pulse quickened whenever she was near. I asked my wife if she needed my help, but she only waved me off, saying, "Get out of here. Can't you see I'm busy?" I thought to myself, if only she knew what was going on. But I just smiled and walked out of the kitchen. I didn't go back to the living room for fear of starting all over again. Dinner was excellent. She made pilaf, salads, and even baked cookies. Everyone was satisfied, and we opened the juice, which also went well. We sat for another hour, and then we parted ways. My mother-in-law and I exchanged a knowing look as we cleaned up, and I couldn't help but feel a rush of anticipation for what was to come. I was exhausted from the day. I couldn't even wake up in the morning from a bomb blast. From there, life went on as usual, without much adventure work, home. After a week or two, my mother-in-law called me and asked me if I wanted to go to the market. Her voice sounded so flirtatious and tempting. Of course I wanted to go, and without hesitation I said, "Meet me at the same place," she said. I grabbed my bag and ran to her. We started walking along the stalls. We had a great time, although we didn't manage to find a secluded spot like last time. We walked through the market, laughing and chatting, peeking into different stalls. Every now and then, she would snuggle up to me, and every time she touched me, I felt a rush of excitement. We were playing a dangerous game, but neither of us wanted to stop. We passed a kiosk selling flowers, and she picked up a bouquet, sniffed it gently, and held it out to me with a smile. I took it, unable to resist the urge to keep my fingers on hers a moment longer than necessary. But then there was a spot in the market where boxes were piled in a heap. No one was wandering around. We found a dark corner and had plenty of time to give each other what we wanted. My wife again spent an hour in the kitchen, and what a coincidence, Ida had another headache. I didn't hesitate and sat down in a chair nearby. I thought, well, I'm not going anywhere. I'll always be at your service, as they say. Yes, I'm patient. I'm sure I'll wait for the right moment and find another reason to meet, like going to the market. Sitting here, I couldn't help but think of our meetings at the market. The thrill of those moments, the adrenaline rush, and the feeling of being on the edge were intoxicating. Compared to that, the mundane aspects of life seemed boring. I realized that we couldn't go on like this, that sooner or later we would have to stop or risk everything. But for now, I was content to wait, procrastinate, and be ready when the opportunity arose again. Life continued as usual, but now there was excitement added to everything. Every time the phone rang, my heart raced as I wondered if it was her. Every time I saw her, there was an unspoken understanding between us, a tension that hung in the air just waiting for the right moment to break out. And no matter how much I realized it was wrong, I couldn't bring myself to regret it. The thrill, the excitement, the connection, it was all worth it, and I was willing to wait as long as it took for our next meeting.